You take me simply as I am. Jesus, I'm grateful. You take me simply as I am. Jesus, I'm grateful. You take me simply as I am. Jesus, I'm grateful. You take me simply as I am. I'm grateful. All the blessings I've received, you gave me more than I could dream. You didn't stop where I could see. I don't deserve this love. I don't deserve this love. Jesus, I'm grateful. Jesus, I'm grateful. You take me simply as I
There are many ways to connect with us at Dulles, whether it's signing up for a group, signing up for a serving project, or even an event our kids team or student team is having. We have made it easy for you to quickly connect with us right here on the app. Once you're in the app on the home page, you will see upcoming events. This is where all of our winery gatherings will be posted and any other special events that are coming up. Then click the Connect tab at the bottom. This is where you can follow us on social media, sign up for groups, join one of our teams here at Dulles, and stay connected with our kids and students. The 45 is our space for students. Here, you can learn more about the 45 and you can connect with the amazing team of student leaders by clicking Parent Connection Card. You also can view all the details for our weekly student gatherings and hangouts. Our students hang out every week, typically on Sundays, and we will update this page every week with the details for the next student gathering. Makes connecting with Dulles simple and fun for you. Keep exploring the app. We'll be using it from now on for all things Dulles.
Dulles family, happy Sunday. So, needless to say, this past year, how do you describe it? There was so much separation and division of the last year. Obviously, we were physically separated by the virus, and we were divided in so many ways. We were politically and even racially divided. I think division will define a lot of the last 12 months. So, the message today, I think, is so timely. Andy Stanley recently gave this talk. It's 22 minutes long. And I want to ask all of you to just stop what you're doing, set aside any distractions, and really take this to heart. If you're watching online, don't just tune in. And if you're at Light Ridge, don't just watch. I'm asking you to absorb this story. In this 22 minutes, Andy's message, which is powerful and challenging and inspiring, is really a story. He gives us a picture that ends with really a question that, answered a certain way, will have everything to do with the future and our world being what we really crave, what we crave for ourselves, what we crave for others, what we crave for our children. Now, if you're not familiar, Andy Stanley is lead pastor of North Point Community Church in Atlanta, and we are a North Point partner church. There are about 90 churches around the country that are North Point partner churches, and we just share a similar conviction that we believe the church was always intended to have its doors wide open to outsiders, people outside of faith, outside of the church, to come in and find the church really as the safest place in the world. With our skepticism or cynicism or tough questions or personal hurts, the church should be welcoming to outsiders. And if you're one of them, if you're joining us new or just have joined us recently, we're so happy you're with us. So I happen to be with quite a few North Point pastors this weekend. We're on a retreat together, and I just thought it was appropriate to share this really compelling vision by Andy. And in 22 minutes, I'll be back to close out our time together as we consider, I think, one of the most important questions for our futures, for our kids' futures, and really for the future of the world. Enjoy this talk. I'll be back in a few minutes.
Today, I want to do something a little different. And I want to take you back in time with me, and I'm going to ask you to use your imagination. In fact, I'm going to use you to use a lot of your imagination. I want you to imagine that you and I and 5 of your best friends, you pick the people or family members, all 6 of us, 5 of them, you and me, the 7 of us, we are able somehow to go back in time to the city of Rome, And the year is 82. And in the year 82, when we show up in the Roman Forum, of course, people that are amazed that time travelers have shown up. When we show up in this period of history, the emperor is a man named Emperor Domitian. You may remember him from school, Emperor Domitian. And Emperor Domitian, there we go. Emperor Domitian was the son of Vespasian, a little context here, and Vespasian was actually a Roman general that Nero sent to Judea to put down the Jewish rebellion. He was there about 2 years. When Nero was assassinated, Vespasian goes back to Rome and becomes the emperor. He leaves his son Titus to finish the work left undone, to finish taking over, basically besieging the city of Jerusalem, punching through the exterior 2 walls, and destroying the temple. He eventually comes back and becomes the emperor as well after Vespasian dies, but he's only the emperor for about 2 years, and then his brother Domitian becomes the emperor of Rome. So when we show up, he's the emperor, and word travels fast that there are time travelers that have come from the 21st century to Rome. And word reaches Emperor Domitian, and immediately he sends someone to invite us to a party. And the party is at the Colosseum because it's the end of 100 days of games. And they're celebrating the end of the 100 days of games with this elaborate party. And so the person they send us guides us out of the Roman Forum down toward the Colosseum. And as we're going in that direction, we actually pass beneath the very recently constructed Arch of Titus. The Arch of Titus was an arch that Domitian actually had constructed to commemorate his brother's victory over the Jews just 12 years earlier. And as we move underneath, we're able to look up and actually see inscriptions depicting the looting of the Jewish temple 14 or 1,500 miles away. Eventually, we are escorted through the VIP gate of the Roman Colosseum, where we are greeted by hundreds of people. There's a large patio. There is food everywhere. There are curious senators. There are slaves. There are escorts. And of course, there seated on a temporary throne is Emperor Domitian himself, surrounded by his Praetorian Guard dressed in purple. It is a lavish meal. We are unfamiliar with most of the foods. It's exotic meats, exotic fruits, lots of eggs, and enough wine to float a ship. In fact, you ask for water, and I remind you that the water here would probably kill you. So we go thirsty. After the meal, Emperor Domitian sends someone to us, and by the way, the only reason we're able to communicate is because I took Latin in the 8th grade, and I paid very, very close attention. So consequently, I can understand them, and I can speak Latin because my Latin teacher in the 8th grade assured us, Mr. LaDuca, assured us that Latin is not a dead language. And so it comes back to life in this particular episode. But you have no idea what's going on. You're just hearing a foreign language and trying to read the body language and the glances and trying to follow what's going on based on what you see around you. And the Roman emperor, Domitian, sends this message with a messenger who comes to our table and says, the emperor would like a report from the future. He wants to know what is the state of the Roman Empire in the 21st century. And you look at me because I'm the only one that can communicate. And I realize that if I don't get this right, we may all become part of the gore on the arena floor. And so I begin, and I say, Your Excellency, to understand the future of Rome, I must first rehearse a bit of recent history. On our way to the Colosseum, we passed through the arch celebrating your late brother's victory over the Jewish rebels. And while it's true that the Roman legions decimated the Jewish people, and while it's true that they destroyed the Jewish temple, the God of the Jews escaped unscathed. And as difficult as this will be for you to believe, eventually Rome, the empire, will embrace the Jewish God as their God. Eventually, Rome will come to believe and accept that the Roman gods that you currently worship are no gods at all. A future emperor will actually oversee the destruction of all your temples. A future Roman emperor will eventually oversee disbanding the priesthood and making it against the law to sacrifice an animal to any of your gods. Well, at this point, the crowd just erupts. And you're looking at me wondering, what have I said? And Domitian is leaning in, and the Praetorian Guard, one by one, drops their right hand to the hilt of their gladius and looks for a signal from Domitian. But he leans forward and he raises his hand and he calls for silence. And he asks this question, how? How can this be? And I say, Emperor Domitian, in order to understand that, I have to take you even further back in time. 50 years ago, just 50 years ago, during the reign of Emperor Tiberius Caesar, in the land of Judea, a man came out of the wilderness named John, and he proclaimed that the Jewish God was about to do something in the world for the world. He was an unseemly character, but he attracted a large crowd. In fact, all of Jerusalem and all of Judea went out to hear John. He has a nickname, John the Baptist. In fact, I see in your group today, Josephus. In our world, Josephus is a famous Jewish historian, and Josephus can confirm what I'm saying about John. Eventually, John got sideways with Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great. And Herod Antipas had him beheaded. But before he did, John the Baptist announced that one was coming after him that would be greater than him. And their leaders in Judea wondered, if John was claiming to be the Messiah, the one that the Jews had been waiting for a long time, a king that would actually, in their minds, overthrow Rome. But John said, no, I'm not the one, but there is one coming after me. Keep your eyes open. And sure enough, very quickly, before John was beheaded, Jesus of Nazareth appeared on the banks of the Jordan River. He began to preach and he spoke as no man had ever spoken before. He announced a brand new kingdom. He announced a kingdom that was not of this world, but a kingdom that was going to touch down in this world and influence the entire world. He was a miracle worker. Like John the Baptist, he attracted crowds, but eventually he got sideways with his own people, the Jewish leaders. They had him arrested. They had him condemned, and he was crucified by Pontius Pilate. I see as well that Senator Tacitus is with us in the crowd. In our world, Senator Tacitus is known for being a famous historian in this era, and he can confirm what I've said about Jesus of Nazareth. He can confirm what I said, that in fact under Pontius Pilate, Jesus suffered the most severe kind of punishment. He can also confirm the fact that what should have been an end was actually a beginning. Because after Jesus had been buried for 3 days, the way that Jewish people measure days, after their Passover, the tomb was found open and empty. And at first people assumed grave robbers, but that didn't make any sense because Jesus was poor. He was a rabbi. He had nothing to steal. And besides, it wasn't items that were buried with him that were gone. His body was missing. And within days, there were rumors that he had been seen in Jerusalem, in the vicinity of Judea, and even in Galilee. And at first it was individuals, then it was groups, then it was tens, then it was dozens, and eventually hundreds of people claimed that Jesus was alive. And his resurrection galvanized the courage of his followers. And they spread the news that in fact, as Jesus had said when he was alive, and had said again after his resurrection, the kingdom of God has come. A kingdom not of this world, but a kingdom for this world. And Jesus, the resurrected rabbi, is in fact the king. And his followers would declare that he was their Lord. His closest followers were arrested, beaten. Many of them were put to death. But they persisted. Their confidence was convincing. Their confidence was contagious because they had seen, had meals with, had listened to their resurrected friend and rabbi, Jesus. Domitian, you know this. Even now, in this city, there are citizens, slaves, men, women, freedmen, visitors who are meeting all over this city in their own apartments, in gardens, under trees, by the river, who worship Jesus of Nazareth as their Lord. And for the next 230 years, your great empire will leverage all of its power and all of its might to stamp out this Nazarene sect. But your efforts will ultimately fail. And though Jesus of Nazareth never visited your grand and glorious city, in the 21st century, his name, his likeness, and his symbol will adorn buildings throughout the city. Emperor Domitian, as impossible as it must be for you to imagine, one day, over the very gate that you entered into the Colosseum through just a couple of hours ago, there will hang an enormous cross, an enormous wooden cross that will no longer represent the ruthlessness or the power of Rome, but in the 21st century, it will represent the power and the love of God, the Jewish God, Yahweh. Well, when I stop, I look around and they're speechless. It's silent. This is impossible. The cross, a symbol of love. All of their temples throughout the empire destroyed. No more priesthood. No more animal sacrifice. Jupiter replaced by the God of the Jews. A Jewish rabbi who's been dead for 50 years will somehow be worshiped by the empire that executed him. Before they can respond, I continue. O great Domitian, as for you, in the future you will be known primarily for your reign of terror. In fact, Domitian, you, along with every other Roman emperor, will be reduced to a paragraph or two in our modern history books, with one exception. And the exception will be the great Caesar Augustus. His name will be referenced every single year in homes and places of worship throughout the world, but not in recognition of his great accomplishments. His name will be referenced within the context of the story of the birth of the Jewish Savior. He will be a footnote in the story of the birth of the Jewish King, Jesus, whose words will be collected and distributed more widely than all the Roman emperors combined. And as impossible as I'm sure this sounds to you, Jesus of Nazareth will be the most influential and revered man who ever lived. And this, Emperor Domitian, is the future of your glorious empire. Rome is not eternal, but there is a God who reigns eternal. It was his temple that your brother destroyed. It was his son that your governor crucified. But in the end, it was his sovereign purpose that your empire advanced. And then I sit down, and there's silence. This is unimaginable. This goes beyond offensive. There's no appropriate response. But then slowly, ever so slowly, a smile breaks out on Emperor Domitian's face. And then he burst into laughter. And because everyone takes their cue from the emperor, the entire crowd burst into laughter, but no one knows why. And the emperor hoists his cup and proposes a toast to the storytellers from the future. Brilliant, he says. Brilliant. You had me believing you right up to the end of your tale. And then he calls for music, makes his way to our table, congratulates us, and then he says, I insist that you join me tomorrow night for dinner once again. But this time, no more fanciful stories. I want the truth. I must know what the future holds for our glorious empire and for this, our eternal city. You see, my friends, what happened, not what was believed, what happened was absolutely inconceivable. What actually happened was impossible. What happened, no one could dream up. What happened, no one could plan. What happened, no one could orchestrate. But what happened was exactly what Jesus predicted. In the region of Caesarea Philippi, surrounded by a group of people with no future and no hope other than to simply survive living under the heel of the Roman Empire, overtaxed, misled by their religious leaders, Jesus said, "Gentlemen, And all of those who came along with the gentleman, because everywhere Jesus went, there were the apostles, and then there was the crowd. He says to the apostles and to that group, ladies and gentlemen, I will build my ecclesia. I will build my gathering, my congregation, my assembly, my movement. It is going to happen. And the gates of Hades, death itself, will not overcome it. And these words must have sounded so hollow, so thin, so trite, so unbelievable standing out there in that blazing hot Syrian sun. But Jesus meant what he said. And the gates of Hades will not overcome it, and it didn't, and it won't. Because what God began and what God continued through the ministry and the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus is linear. God showed up in history with a plan. And we have so much to look back on. We have so much to appreciate. And the thought that we are a small part of what God is doing in our generation in the church that began all those years ago against insurmountable odds is such a privilege. It's what wakes me up in the morning. It's what keeps me going when things get difficult. Because we all have a little bit of time and we all have a little bit of opportunity. And we have been invited into this grand narrative that no one could have imagined and no one could have orchestrated. But my friends, it happened. Jordan Peterson, in his book, 12 Rules for Life, says it so perfectly. I just want you to let him tell you. A new book that basically says what people have been saying for generations, but again, he brings it to life in such a way that I just couldn't say it any better. Here's what he writes. He says, Christianity achieved the well-nigh impossible. There it is. The Christian doctrine elevated the individual soul, placing slave and master and commoner and nobleman alike on the same metaphysical footing, rendering them equal before God and the law. This was unheard of. The implicit, transcendent worth of each and every soul established itself against impossible odds. It is, in fact, he writes, nothing short of a miracle that the hierarchical, slave-based societies of our ancestors reorganize themselves. How? Why? Under the sway of an ethical religious revelation, such that the ownership and absolute domination of another person came to be viewed as wrong. And then this next statement is so heavy and it's so weighty and it's so important. It's why I wanted to read this quote. Because what is so normal to us, what is so expected by us that we think it is just common sense, that it is so self-evident, how could anyone miss it? We are absolutely wrong. Here's what he writes. We forget because most of us never knew. We forget that the opposite was self-evident throughout most of human history. That throughout most of human history, what made perfect sense was that might made right. The one with the gold makes the rules. Owning another person is just natural. Being able to enslave an entire population is natural. This is the way of nature. This is the way of things. It is so self-evident. Why would anyone ever question it? But when Jesus came, everything got turned upside down. And we are stewards of that message. He continues. He says the society produced by Christianity was far less barbaric than the pagan, even the Roman ones it replaced. It objected. You've heard me talk about this before. I just want you to hear it from someone else. It objected to infanticide, to prostitution, to the principle that might means right. It insisted that women were as valuable as men, unheard of in ancient times. It demanded that even a society's enemies be regarded as human. All of this was asking the impossible. But it happened. And it happened around the teaching of one Jewish rabbi whose words should never have survived the dusty first century. Once upon a time, what we consider normal, once upon a time, what we consider self-evident, was inconceivable. And my friends, here's my concern. If we take it for granted, it might vanish from our culture. We take it for granted, and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren may not have it. Some of you want to make America great again, and rightly so. Some of you are concerned about what does again mean? What is again in reference to, and rightly so. Of course, we want our nation to be a great nation. Of course, we want our nation to be as great as it can possibly be. And the key to our nation being as great as it can possibly be is a thriving church. Because a thriving church that truly embraces the message of Jesus, both for this life and the life to come, is a message that impacts the culture and the conscience of a nation. A thriving church is how we get a great nation, because Jesus defined great for us. And he turned it upside down. And he said to his disciples on their way to Jerusalem, when they were arguing about who's going to be the greatest among us. I mean, Jesus, we know that you're number one, but we want to know who gets to be number two and number three in the kingdom. When you rip off your rabbi robe and there's a big M and you're the Messiah, and you turn around on the back and there's a big K because you're the king, we want to know who sits at your left hand and who sits at your right hand. And Jesus said to them, all of you sit down. Because you still don't understand. This isn't the way it works. In the rest of the world, that's how the structures of power work, but not in my kingdom. And my kingdom is completely backwards. And my kingdom is completely upside down. I want you to follow me, he would say. But as you follow me, you remember this. Even the Son of Man, talking about himself, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. And he would say to them, if you're up for that, you follow me, and we will change the world.
Okay, so as we transition out of this just unbelievable year into freedom and into summer and travel, I want to ask you on this Sunday to lean into your church like never before. In the weeks ahead, even though it's summer, in the months ahead, that you would lean into our church family like never before. We need each other. Listen, in a normal summer, churches see attendance wane, and we see people, traveling and not really around a whole lot. A lot of churches experience that through the summer, and it's pretty normal. I mean, we're going into a summer like none other. If ever there's been a time to just get out of town or to enjoy being outside, it's this summer. And yet, we need to be the church, and we need each other. The world and the future of the world. I know that sounds dramatic, but I believe it deep in my heart and soul. It is a part of my passion that the world needs the church to look like Jesus, sound like Jesus, and behave like Jesus. If we do, when the church looks and sounds and behaves like Jesus, there's nothing more compelling on this planet. There's no safer place in the world. And so I'm going to pray with you that even with all of the freedom of post-pandemic life, that we would take seriously our gathering together and our relationships and our serving together as we already start to gear up for this fall and inviting many people to join us. God, I pray that we would enjoy the travel, and we would enjoy the weather, and we would enjoy this summer, and maybe we're going to enjoy it and celebrate life like we never have before. But God, we can do that in the context of church. Remind us of how desperately we cannot survive spiritually without one another. We can't sustain our relationship with you, God, without each other. So may we prioritize our church family as we look to the future in being reflections and the image of you in this hurting world. All right. Listen, I love you guys. I'm excited to get back. I'm kicking off a new series next week that I'm really looking forward to. I love you guys a lot. I'll see you online this week.